God offers us life through the death of Jesus on the cross. Colossians 2 verses 13 and 14 show us how this exchange works, and it's incredibly good news. So let's read starting in verse 13. It says, "You who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. This he set aside, nailing it to the cross." So first of all, this passage teaches us who we are without Christ. It says, "You who were dead in your trespasses." We were dead in our trespasses. The Bible teaches us that all of humanity, because of our sin, have died spiritually. And one day we will die physically. If you are not a Christian, you need to recognize that you're not okay. You might think, "Oh, well, I'm a pretty good person. I think I'll be all right." But in reality, what the Bible teaches us is that without Christ, we are dead. We're hopeless. What can a dead person do about being dead? Nothing. They're hopelessly dead in our sins. And if you don't have Christ, you are spiritually dead, and you will soon be physically dead as well because of that. But God gives us an answer to this bad news. "You who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive." God did something. God did something to take people who were dead and make them live. How? Well, first of all, together with him. Think back, what's the story of Jesus? Jesus died on the cross, and then he was raised on the third day. That God is saying here that through the work of Jesus, as Jesus was dead and raised up, we can also be raised up with him. That the victory Jesus won over death, that we can identify with that as well. That we can be raised up together with him. How? Well, we're dead because of our sins, right? Because we have sinned against a holy and perfect God, and the penalty of that is death. But it says that God has forgiven us all our trespasses. Not just some, he has forgiven us all our trespasses. This God, this perfect God, who would be right to judge us for our sins, to leave us in our spiritual death and to leave us to the physical death that we will one day experience. Instead, he has forgiven us of our sins. How? How has God forgiven us? He has canceled the record of debt that stood against us. Now, this is another way of framing this. We talk about us being dead spiritually because of our sins. But we can also see it as us being in deep debt, that we have an extraordinary amount of debt that we could never pay off. And God has canceled the record of that debt. Now, how could God set that debt aside and say, "Hey, it's paid for, it's done"? It has to be paid for from somewhere, right? Well, what God did, he set it aside by nailing it to the cross. Now that's interesting, because what was actually nailed to the cross? Jesus was actually nailed to the cross. This is teaching us that when Jesus went to the cross and was nailed to the cross, God put our debt on him. God put our sin on him. God put our death on him. And he hung there on the cross holding our trespasses, our sins, our debts, our death, so that we could stand and receive his sinlessness. So we could stand and receive his payment for our debt. That we could stand and receive his life. That we could be made alive in him. Jesus held it there so that we could take all of his good. Listen, if you've found that you're always falling short, that you can't ever quite be good enough, that all your efforts to be right with God or to live a good life just don't quite get you there, put your faith in Jesus. Your failure and your sin and your death is absorbed by him on the cross. And he gives you his life so that you don't have to live in spiritual death, but you can actually be raised to life in him. God offers us life through the death of Jesus on the cross.